Oh boy, here it is. It's happening. The slave theory. Hello there, mighty children of the apocalypse. How are we doing today? I've developed this theory over countless of nights that were sleepless, that were emotional, that were just essentially deprived. But I was at a part of a lifetime where I was making certain decisions that led to me essentially getting freedom. I received freedom of whatever choice of job I want to have, whatever choice of women I want to have. I was suddenly not restricted by anything, right? When you go from a relationship to being single, you receive options. When you go from being in a job to being jobless, you receive options. These freedoms are, well, that's just what they are. They're the definition of freedom, right? It's like a hotel with a buffet. Just, eat whatever you want, right? Load as much food as you want on your platter. It's just carpe diem. That's literally what it is. It's almost carpe diem-like. Just go out there, enjoy your day, be hedonistic, and just, yeah. Now, for most people, when they hear the word slave, they probably imagine it's not even stereotypical, it's just that's how it was. The, African-American male in a cotton field with a ball and chain, right, getting, whipped. Something straight out of Django Unchained, for example. And for the rest of the world, us Europeans, there are, still other versions of slavery because, there have been these wars that were happening in the Balkan, obviously World War, and so a lot of prisoners. Usually people equate slavery with sort of being locked up, being restricted, your freedom being taken away from you. And these are all horrible, horrible things that I by no means condone. However, this is a theory, and in part of the theory, we have to evolve into hypo-imaginative thinking. So imagine that slave, whatever that picture, when you close your eyes and you think of a slave, whatever that might be, chances are that you do imagine somebody who has no freedom, right? But you'd be wrong. See, the slave, within his limited selection of things he can do, and he cannot do a lot, he doesn't have to worry about what school he's going to go to. He doesn't have to worry about whether he's going to find the right girl, whether he should marry, whether he's going to pay off his mortgage, right? All these things don't concern the slave because he doesn't have the freedom to access them. The opportunity isn't there. And as such, he is free from what the rest of us aren't free of. All of us have options, right? It's ironic how a person, for example, will be depressed because he cannot find the right girl, but he has all the options to do so, unless he's locked up in a cave somewhere, right? Nobody's holding a gun to your head saying you cannot go find a girl. Nobody's forcing you to do a job you don't enjoy, yet you still go there and you choose to do it because you have to, because it's part of paying off your mortgage, paying off your student loan, living the life in this here society. See, the slave hasn't got any of that. So in a weird way, in a hypothetical, theoretical realm, he is free of that burden. Now let's imagine the ideal man's life, right? You see this man he's got a big house, he's got a great job, he's got two beautiful kids, a gorgeous wife, a luscious garden, a swimming pool, a jacuzzi, a private golf course, supercars, your Andrew Tate or whatever. And you see all these things and you think, I would love to have that lifestyle for me. You look at that and you go, how would I love to be him? How would I love to have all these things he has? But what you don't get to see, and what you don't see in your average Instagram posts of your influencers, what you don't see in these happy couple stories, is the guy working 16 hours a day, not enjoying his work. The super luxurious car that he has is nothing but a surplus to get him from point A to point B. The swimming pool he rarely uses. The kids don't get to see him. He doesn't get to see his kids growing up. His wife is miserable, even though she lives in the house of her dreams. And in the dark shadows of that relationship, there's There's this stewing anger and despotism and an affairs brewing and hatred. And it's just disappointment and sadness. And even though on the outside they look like a beautiful, happy family with all the options and all the money and all the freedom and yet they're miserable. They're miserable because they live in the very matter that hell is constructed from. And it's their own relationship. They have a circle of hell of their freedom. And then we go back to our slave. Our slave is wielding a sledgehammer, and he's just clanking away at little boulders. And he's smashing those boulders into rocks, and those bigger rocks into smaller rocks, and those smaller rocks into even tinier rocks, and in the tinier rocks to gravel, and the gravel to sand. And he does that every day. Every day for the rest of his life, that slave is just hammering and hammering and hammering at those rocks. And yet he's free because he doesn't have any of those things to worry about. And I think inherently humans like being slaves. I think we're sort of conditioned to like the idea of being part of the matrix, being part of the social dogma which tells us what we can or cannot do. And we like to bow. We like to say, yes, sir, thank you, sir. And we get fed bullshit for the rest of our lives. Later tonight, when it's dark, I want you to go outside and I want you to look up. Chances are it's going to be a clear night and you'll be able to see a couple of stars. I want you to think at how small an ant is and how big you are compared to the ant. And then think about how big the earth is that you stand on and how tiny you are compared to it. Think about how just enormous the earth is and yet how tiny it is in our solar system, and how tiny our solar system is in our Milky Way, and how tiny the Milky Way is in the rest of the universe, and how the universe is infinite and it's infinitely expendable. We cannot fathom the sheer size of all this freedom. The chances are you now feel anxiety. You feel the weight of the world on your shoulders. And yet, those are the options. Those are all the freedoms of all the universes, all the potential versions of you, all the millions and trillions and quadrillions of carbon copies of you. All the 100 versions of me standing here talking about the same thing, just in a different universe. In one, I'm missing an arm, and another one, I've got a spot on my forehead, and a third one, I've got long hair. That's the infinity of the universe. That's all the freedom, and you feel trapped by it. And that is why I believe the slave has more freedom sometimes than the most freest of people. Now, what's the conclusion? What are you really trying to say? Is it that we should be slaves? Is it we shouldn't be slaves? I think it's a bit of both. I think that inherently how you live your life, you're going to be a slave to certain degrees. And it really boils down to what your definition of slavery is. You could say that being overtly religious is a slavery. You could say that working any job ever is a slavery. And it, cuts both ways. And okay, so I won't get a job. I'll be a job maker. Well, then you're the slaver, I guess. I mean, there is no win-win scenario. But I think being aware of it, intrinsically aware that the sheer amount of freedom that you have, and if you give yourself too much freedom at a given time frame, whether this is selecting a woman, whether this is selecting your morning cereal, whether this is choosing your career path, too many options will create anxiety. Too many options will create depression. Too many options will actually start closing the doors for you because you'll feel overwhelmed by the amount of opportunity. So I think in life you have to sort of carve your way through you don't want to get slaved by one thing, but you also don't want to be overtly free to the point where you start veering off in the wrong direction. So I think a healthy life balance involves understanding the slave theory for what it is. It is just a theory. But I like to keep an open mind to it. Whenever I talk to people, whenever I do a job, whenever I take up a project, whenever I choose to date somebody, I try to keep in my mind that every option you take, every choice you make, every step you make in life, you're moving into a certain direction. And you always want to keep some options open, but you never want to keep all the options open. Because all options are all the good, they're also all the bad. And you have to take one with the other. Thank you very much, and I'll catch you in the next one. Don't forget to look up at the stars today. They're gorgeous, they're big, and they tell you a lot about yourself. Love you all. Bye-bye. Take care. Safe flying.